Rebecca, you've got the final story.
I'm up. That's it. I'm on deck. I think I have some slides if I was able to get those to you.
Yeah.
I do. So this story actually kind of started back at the very end of 2023, where there was a headline in the church news that said topics and questions replaces gospel topics and provides resources for those seeking answers and for helping others with other gospel questions. So of course, alarm bells went off for everybody. We thought, are they actually replacing the gospel topics essays? So I looked into this to make sure that's not what's happening, because we all know those are very pivotal in a lot of our faith journeys. Let's go to the next slide.
And if, Rebecca, if it's okay, just to give a tiny bit of history there, can you tell our Never Mormon viewers and listeners what it was like in the church before the gospel topics essays, and just really quickly when they came out and what they talked about and why that was important?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I do need to remember that instead of just saying everybody knows what this is, because everybody doesn't. And why should you? That's right. So these were a series of essays put out in 2013, 14-ish by the church to answer questions. It was a period as the internet arrives and people are starting to question. They're starting to wonder about the truth claims of the church. Sometimes entire congregations have questions, and they'll send general authorities to places like the Swedish Rescue to try to answer questions. So I guess somebody decided that there needed to be some essays that addressed some of the major questions that they saw being asked, some of the truth claims. So these essays were created. They're kind of authored. You don't really know who wrote them. You don't really know where they came from. And they were sort of slipped into the lexicon. Like nobody really knew they were there. People would come across them and use them in their lessons for Sunday school or to teach something at church. And sometimes they'd get in trouble for that, because their leaders would say, where did you get that information? Where did that come from? Because the essays attempted to, at least in part, answer some of these questions, giving a little more information than what the common person would know. From my perspective, and I do a series on my podcast with the Backyard Professor about the gospel topic essays. We go through one by one. They fall quite short, but they did make some strides that had not been made before. So these essays, when people who are questioning stumble across them, often can be a place where your proverbial shelf starts to break, because you're reading this from your own church. You're reading Joseph did have more than one wife. The DNA does not match up with the Book of Mormon. You're reading these things from your own church source. And so they're definitely something that a lot of people attribute some of their first cracks in their shelf, if not leaving altogether, to the gospel topics essays. So I would say that post-Mormons are very protective over these essays. They exist on the church website from time to time. They're harder to find than others. I don't know if they move around, but sometimes it's hard to Google them. So when we hear topics and questions are replacing the gospel topics essay, that's what people thought was happening. Of course, alarm bells go off, but that is actually not what happened. And I'm happy to tell you the gospel topic essays are still there for everybody to read. Was that a good enough explanation,
That's
John?
great.
Does anyone want to say any more about those essays?
No, that's great. And I think not just ex-Mormons love these essays. I think historians, people who care about Mormon history, and even progressive and liberal Mormons all think these essays were major steps forward for the church in terms of starting to become more transparent and honest and open about its problematic history.
Can we just be clear, though? The gospel topic essays, yes, more honest, but they're not honest.
Exactly.
They're still carefully worded.
Yes.
They still give the benefit of the doubt to the extreme in every instance, and they still don't give the reader a full context of why this issue is problematic.
Absolutely. 100% correct. Yeah.
The way I look at it is the church long ago has been stealing cookies out of the cookie jar, and they stole 5 cookies out of the cookie jar. And for decades and decades, they've been denying they stole any cookies out of the cookie jar. And with these essays, they are now admitting that, yes, they stole 1 cookie out of the cookie jar.
Or cookies were stolen, but not by me.
Are you channeling some Sesame Street? I hear this 1 cookie. That's kind of what you sounded like right there.
Cookie. C is for cookie. It's good enough for me. C is for good. Okay. All right, Rebecca. What do you
I don't
got?
even want to go on with my story. I just want you to keep singing. That was amazing.
I'm going to leave now so I can clip that and put it on TikTok.
Somebody clip it right now, please.
Cookie,
One of our viewers and
cookie
listeners, do
starts
it.
with C. Hey, Bill, you're not the only guy who can do imitations.
Look at that.
Oh my God.
Were you saying something, Rebecca? I can't remember.
I think we'll just end it here. I mean, what could top this, right? Although this is very interesting. Okay, let's go on to our next slide quickly. So basically, the church article said that this is going to be a new resource for people that have questions. Again, they're acknowledging people have questions. So next time we saw mention of this was in the Tribune. That's our next slide. There was an article just last week where the title is LDS leaders sin and policy changes, and that's okay, church says in new guides. So this article in the Tribune is telling us what the Church News had said a couple weeks earlier. So if you go to the next slide, I thought this was very interesting. It says the term faith crisis doesn't show up anywhere in the 2 brand new resources on the official website of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but that appears to be precisely what the guides hope to address. So again, acknowledging that people have questions, which I think is a step in itself. So there are 2 different guides. And if you go to the next slide, there's one guide for a person who has questions themselves. If you are a questioner, this part of the guide is going to help you. Now, before you seek answers to your questions, this is the part that I thought was really interesting. There are some steps that you personally have to take to be in the right headspace to receive the answers that the church wants you to receive and to accept those answers. So the first thing is you have to center your life on Jesus Christ. Okay, you have to be right with God before you can even try to get the right answer. You have to be patient with yourself and with others who are trying to help you gain answers. So you have to listen, you have to do due diligence, and you have to give yourself the benefit of the doubt if you still say, that doesn't sound right. Be patient. Eventually, you'll convince yourself it does. You have to recognize that revelation is a process. That's sort of the same thing. It's going to be a process for you to arrive at the answer they want you to arrive at. Very important here, consult reliable sources. And this is what this new topics and questions purports to be, a reliable source from the church. And this one is also very interesting, work to understand the past. Because of course, truth claims and the past, it's a very dicey relationship. So they're telling you within this framework that you need to work carefully to understand the history of the church, and how better to do that but to turn to church-approved sources themselves, like the Gospel Topics essays or the Topics and Questions Guide, to be able to understand those questions from the past. The other thing that they mention, if you go to the next slide.
Did you want to read the bottom part, or did we get the bottom part?
What?
Did you want to read the bottom part of this slide?
I mean, I can, if you want to read out loud.
No.
Sure. Or it kind of is almost in what I described. So
okay.
The other thing that's important as a seeker of answers to your gospel questions is that you have to demonstrate patience to the members that are trying to help. So if you go to your family member and you say, I just don't understand this DNA in the Book of Mormon, they give you some kind of church answer, and you're not satisfied with that, you have to be patient until you can understand what they're trying to say. Again, keep in mind, revelation can be a struggle. Also, be careful of inflammatory sources or sources that say that they have no bias. You need to be careful where you're getting your information from, and that, I believe, is from the church. You'll get the right answer that way. You have to learn to tell the difference between facts and interpretation. That's also very important. And you have to seek out experts or those with direct knowledge of the subject. Again, it's implied that would be the church sources. So anybody have any comments just on this part as a seeker of truth and the steps that you yourself have to go through before you can find an answer?
You know, to watch out for bias, for instance. It was Elder Oaks who said it's not the church's job to represent the issue fairly, nor is it the critic's job to represent the issue fairly. And he was pointing to the media and saying that it's the media's job to be fair about the church. But what Elder Oaks acknowledges in that admittance is that the church is just as biased as the critic, and I would argue more. Because I think the critic, for the most part, does a really good job of laying out the history in its honest, transparent, full breadth and scope, because I'm happy if the truth is put on the table from all sides. I'm content with that. The church isn't content with that, but I'm content. I think Radio Free Mormon's content. I think the two of you are content. If the Book of Abraham, for instance, if all the pros and cons, all the sticky angles to that issue were just laid on the table and people were allowed to read it and to come to an understanding themselves. Elder Oaks and the church they want you to pretend they're the unbiased, trustworthy source, but in almost every instance, they are the worst source for telling an accurate portrayal of what happened in church history and an accurate portrayal of what leaders said in the past and what they meant. And so if we're going to go to sources that don't have bias, you probably ought to start by leaving the church and its sources on the cutting room floor.
That's the irony. The truth is like a lion. If you set it free, it will be able to defend itself. Isn't that what they say?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that, RFM?
C is for crisis. That's good enough for me. And what and who would be a better expert to consult on the book of Abraham than the late great Robert Rittner?
Right.
Exactly. But
I don't think that's what they mean.
That is not what they mean.
All roads lead to Rome. These are strategies to kick the ball down the road until you croak without getting an answer to your questions, but remain active in the church.
That's it. Paying tithing and bum in the seat. And again, I just think it really does put it back on the questioner. If you're still confused and you still feel that cognitive dissonance, you're not right with Christ. You need to look at yourself. You need to get right with God, and then you're going to be able to get the answer that you're supposed to get. So that's a section on questioner. You yourself are the questioner. Now, more interestingly,
Rebecca, can I just read something really quickly?
Yes, please
add.
So
I was just pulled up the Trib article just because I thought it was kind of interesting. And I want to read a quote from Terrell Givens, who's kind of a chief apologist for the church. He makes the quote that this section that we just read, the work to understand the past section, is, quote, one of the most remarkable acknowledgments we've ever had on the official church site about the role of culture and language in shaping our understandings and in limiting our ability to hear God. And then it goes on to say it's a recognition that Protestants and Catholics came to in the early 20th century in what Givens refers to as the crisis of modernism, a period in which Western Christianity grappled with academic research on topics ranging from the history of the Bible to the theory of evolution. So he's, number one, calling this a super significant statement.
Yeah.
Why are you laughing? Why are y'all laughing? I want to hear that. Why?
Because it's a great thing to have 15 prophets and apostles who can lead us, directed by God, to be 100 freaking years behind the Protestants
and the Catholics. Come on. The great abominable church and all the Protestants beat us 100 years to the punch, but we thank thee, O God, for a prophet.
What are we paying these guys for?
Are we paying them? I hope we're not paying them. So no, and that's a very good point. That's why it was really interesting. Understand the past. And again, understand it through their lens. And it's very different than what the truth is, I'm afraid, at least in my opinion. Again, this is all in my opinion. So
and really quickly, Rebecca, I know you want to get on. I just have to share this last part. He writes, why was our crisis delayed? Our crisis was delayed about 100 years for all kinds of interesting reasons. Among them, quote, the insularity of our culture and reliance upon prophets rather than scholars. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that sounds like blaming the victim, because it's basically saying it's not the prophets, it's the insularity of our culture and the reliance on prophets rather than scholars. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, we never told you to listen to prophets. Where'd you get that idea?
Right. Who demanded that? Right. Who demanded that?
Follow the prophet.
Right. This is why Terrell Givens frequently gets mistaken for a weasel on the street.
Yeah. And then just, they go on and just say that the forecasts were wildly optimistic. Why did this happen? Because Rodney Stark made some wildly optimistic forecasts about the growth of the church, but unfortunately, those forecasts have, quote, fallen flat. That's a nice way of saying the church is hemorrhaging. It's in free fall, and the church was forced by the internet and by podcasters and scholars, authors, to come clean about its history, because so many people were leaving the church, not because of the problematic history, but because they felt lied to and deceived by the church. I also thought it was cool that this article mentioned the church's history in excommunicating scholars and podcasters and truth tellers. And, it seems as though the church has backed off. The last thing on this quote, it basically says, after all, 30 years ago, Latter-day Saint leaders were excommunicating and disfellowshipping a number of high-profile intellectuals. I don't know about this guy's math, but I don't think it's been 30 years since the church stopped excommunicating and disfellowshipping high-profile intellectuals. Bill Reel, when were you excommunicated?
I don't know, John. When were you excommunicated?
I'm looking at this crowd here. Absolutely. That's what I'm looking at.
Well, RFM, why are you slacking, man? You and Rebecca, why are y'all slacking? Where's your excommunications?
We're not intellectual enough.
Seriously, Terrell Givens is like a weasel and a snake had a baby and then dipped it in grease. That's how slippery he is.
Whew.
But
I think
if
they're
you
trying
just
to
quote
say-
Shakespeare.
I also thought it was
talking
fun
about
that they had to get a quote about Russell Ballard in
Yes.
there. That
Yes.
quote that he made that gone are the days where we can ignore the truth about the church history. Now we've got to be open and honest about it. So shout out to the late great M. Russell Ballard, right?
We're as honest as we know how to be.
That's it. But it's almost too little too late. It's almost at the end, right? The point of no return, because what they're saying is that now even the most siloed active Mormon who has never even looked around at anything else is finally starting to notice something's happening. People are questioning. People are leaving. They're finally starting to notice. And so hence this guide, topics and questions. So we learned about a
Back to you,
questioner. But here's the most interesting part, I think, is that there's a whole section on how to deal with questions from other people. That's not really something that they encouraged you to do in the past, is to even entertain questions from other people, right? So if you go to the next slide, there's a whole section that talks about how you might talk to somebody who has a question. So yeah, one back, I think. Forward. One more, and then after that. There it is. Okay. So these are for seeking answers, helping those seeking answers to their own questions. So the first thing I think is very encouraging. It tells you if someone comes to you as a faithful member with a question, you should respond with love. Like that shouldn't even have to be stated, but I'm glad that it is. You should respond to with love. If your child comes to you with a question, you're a faithful Mormon, you should be able to talk to them in a loving environment. Listen with humility. I guess that means maybe you don't judge them. Try to understand where they are coming from and why they are questioning. Okay, but then we get right back to it. Trust in the Lord, right? You need to be okay with God. You need to be secure in your own views so that you can reach across with the oxygen mask, the spiritual oxygen mask on your own face, and you can reach out to the questioner and help them. Again, next step, nourish your own faith. Certainly, you're not going to let any kind of questions from anybody else as you're trying to help them affect your own faith. So you have to insulate that. You have to protect that as you reach out and try to help someone else. And then the fifth one I think is positive, assist them throughout their journey. So that means don't drop them right in the middle. I think that was, how many of us have ever had a conversation with somebody, questions when you were still in, and they're just like, I'm not talking anymore. That's it. We're done. I'm not going to say anything else. So this guide, at least on the surface, seems to be saying, go ahead and engage. Go ahead and talk. See if you can help. The next slide shows some additional steps when dealing with a questioner. And that is avoid being dismissive or judgmental. How many of us have had that happen to us? Quite a few. Love the individual without compromise. See, these I think are positive steps. Don't make it conditional. Either you believe in the church or I don't love you anymore. A lot of us of a certain age were raised in an era where that was quite common. Here again is a little protect yourself, establish healthy boundaries. Maybe if they're talking about things you don't want to hear too much, you might have to say to them, okay, we're going to table this. I love you, but let's agree to disagree. Become more familiar with common questions. That's my favorite. That's telling people to dig in. For example, I have friends who their child was on a mission, wrote them letters with questions. As good, faithful parents, they said, we're going to find the answers. And you can imagine what happened to this whole family that has now left Mormonism. So be a safe source for discussion. And again, I think that's just being a good human being, right? And this is a change, I think, from in the past where they told people to just stay away. However, my question about this whole list is that we get a different message from the pulpit. Just last conference, we hear do not engage with people who believe differently from you, right? So I'm not sure about that mixed message. Do any of you have any thoughts on that with what they're saying here in this guide and what we tend to hear from the pulpit?
Yeah, didn't Nelson himself say don't ever ask the opinion of a non-Mormon, basically?
That's what he said.
About anything.
Yeah.
Right?
That's why it's hard to reconcile the two parts of the information there. I don't know. Any other thoughts?
But become more familiar with common questions just as long as you don't research.
Exactly.
Is what President Oaks said in Chicago a couple of years ago. Research is not the answer.
Yeah.
Says the former Supreme Court justice who has all of his clerks doing all of his research for him to write his opinions. Oh my goodness. What the reason this is easy for me to reconcile, and I may be completely out to lunch here, but this has all the earmarks of a CYA letter. They don't mean this. They have never meant this. This is BS. This is when they get caught off first base. They can point to it if something that they never meant to do, they've never done, they're never going to do, because they got the president of the church, for crying out loud, teaching the exact opposite. And they have his first counselor teaching the exact opposite. What is it that the members of the church are going to do? Are they going to listen to their leaders, or are they going to find some article in an obscure location on the church website where it was designed probably to not be found, just like the essays? That's my question.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And think about your old friend Kyle McKay. He said finding answers is not the solution. Just let that go. So yeah, there's definitely mixed messages. Any more thoughts on that? And then we'll dive in quickly as to what is actually in this guide, which is absolutely fascinating.
I'll just say that I think, though, back when I was a member, when I was a progressive member, trying to get the church to not only be honest about its history, but to stop stigmatizing doubt and to support questioning, and most importantly, to change the culture to make Mormonism a safer place to question, I would have died, maybe not died, I would have paid a full 10% of my tithing to get the church to make statements like this. So I don't want to be throw water on everyone's cynicism. I think these are really significant changes. These are statements and changes I would have never expected the Mormon church to make. And even though we're still going to get mixed messages, I'm reminded of the 2 meetings I had with Jeffrey R. Holland, where he basically said, one of the things people don't understand about the Mormon church is they think that the apostles just sort of say what the church needs to do and that everybody just does whatever the apostles say. But his expressed frustration to me was that it's a slog to change this church. And it takes decades. But can't we all agree that this is a really set of positive steps that we should applaud, or not?
Yeah, no, I do. And I didn't mean to be facetious. I was getting a little silly because, some of it you can kind of look at it that way. But absolutely, a lot of those steps are trying to eradicate the behavior where you were simply not listened to at all if you had a question. You were just completely shunned and othered. This is a huge step in the direction of telling faithful members, you don't need to be afraid of your relative or your child or your neighbor who's saying, I'm just not sure anymore. And hopefully it means love wins, right? A lot of those statements there said, love the person, be compassionate, stay with them for the journey. That's my hope for that. I hope that's what that means.
While the church is talking out of both sides of its mouth, at the very least, this is a reference that a doubter could point to ask a bishop or a parent or a sibling to be more empathetic and compassionate while dealing with one's questions.
Yep, absolutely.
I appreciate the youthful credulity of all 3 of you, and I hope that you are right and I am wrong.
Are you that much older than the rest of us, RFM?
No, you're not that much older than me.
It's not the years, honey. It's the mileage.
All right. Let's quickly dive into
one last quick thing. Sorry. RFM, you called Terrell Givens a slimy weasel, I think it was, to quote you.
No. I first called him a weasel. And then I said, he's like a snake and a weasel had a baby and then dipped it in, what did I say? In
grease.
Grease.
It's greasy. Okay, sorry, a greasy weasel. Offspring. Okay, I just want to say, you guys may not like Terrell Givens. Can you imagine how hard it would have been to shepherd these changes through the first presidency of the Quorum of the 12? Yep. Don't you believe that this would have been an excruciating slog to sit in the Maxwell Institute chair and to try and convince Correlation and Apostles and Bednar and freaking Oakes and Nelson and all those dudes to sign off on these changes? Don't they deserve our applause or our respect for how difficult that must have been, or not? It's okay to say no. I just want to be fair.
It only took 185 years to get here.
I know, and at least I didn't call him freaking Givens.
There are so many sound bites here.
I have nothing against him. I think he is the biggest thing going in Mormonism to destroy people's testimonies.
Whoa, why that? Why is that?
Oh, I did an entire episode on this at Radio Free Mormon.
Yeah. Tell us about it.
What was it? The incredible, what do you call it when you're subversive? Yes, the amazing subversive Terrell Givens.
Trojan horse.
Because he's Mr. Bricolage. That should be his moniker, Mr. Bricolage. You know what bricolage is, right? It's his big fancy word that he gives to what Joseph Smith did, which means he's stealing stuff right and left from all these other different sources. And Terrell Givens goes out of his way. He puts the cherry on top of doing additional research about all these sources that Joseph Smith is cribbing from to come up with Mormonism.
Inspired syncretist. Wasn't that one of his words?
Yeah, who knows? Because he deals in big words and not a lot of meaning. Frankly, he uses words to mask his meaning, a la Neil A. Maxwell. However, what he does is he says everything that Joseph Smith did was done by somebody else, and it was available in his environment. And he took from all these people, put it all together, and came up with the miracle of Mormonism. And so now Terrell Givens has retreated to the position, believe it or not, that the miracle of Mormonism and the inspiration and revelation of God to Joseph Smith wasn't in revealing stuff to him like I was taught when I grew up. No, the inspiration and revelation came to Joseph Smith as to what it was he should steal from other people. That's why I call him the amazing, subversive Terrell Givens.
You're only as good as who you steal from. We all know that. So,
Rebecca, do you think these changes would have been hard to get through Correlation? And
I do. No, I understand that there are people that are working. I mean, we can't say the other side, this side. There are people that are trying to do good, and it would be very hard to, because compared to the brethren, he is very progressive, outrageously progressive, and he sees things perhaps they don't. And I bet he's frustrated a lot of the times.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Rebecca.
All right,
sorry.
last slide here, and
that.
I know we want to make sure we hit the top of the hour here, but I'd like to tell you all what is actually in this guide. So the reason people were confused is it said that this was going to replace gospel topics. There is another section, very little used, called gospel topics. It was kind of half filled. It really was nothing, and that's what it's replacing. The gospel topic essays are actually referred to in a lot of the bullet. You click on these little things here. If you want to look at Book of Mormon and DNA studies, and I guess we should have brought this up live, but I didn't. This is just a still picture. You would click on that, and it actually takes you to a see also note. See the gospel topics essays. So all the gospel topic essays are reflected in the topics and questions guide. Now there are 40 as of now topics that you can look up and click on. Are you curious about Book of Mormon translation? You can click on that, and that one does take you over to another gospel topics essay. Are you curious about Book of Mormon geography? You can click on that. Now that takes you to a rather apologetic article that talks about there is no official position on Book of Mormon geography. They're not going to be weighing in on that. It happened in ancient America. That's where it was. And the most important thing to remember is that Book of Mormon should be read to increase your testimony of Christ. So that kind of gives you idea of the flavor. Now you can go to, it has a list of scriptures. It has some videos about the topic, all under this one section. And it has articles from past general authorities and prophets. Now, what I noticed, and I've spent several hours going through this, all of the articles are really, really dated. Like we're talking 1985, 1995. I looked through all of it. The newest one I saw, the most recent one was 2015 about any of these topics. There was one that I came across by iRing that was 2018, but it was about a general topic about loving yourself, forgiving yourself. So anything that has to do with history, a truth claim, a question, these articles are dated. We're going back to Hinckley's time, which is so interesting to me, why they're putting this information out that is 30 years old, 10 years old, decades old. If you go back to that slide again, the one on, curious, church finance. I want to learn what's there because I heard something about an SEC fine. I heard something about something was happening with the stock market. Do you know what's in that section? And I should have really pulled it up. It talks about how the church, they didn't really want to get involved in commerce or business, but they needed to have a place for people to stay when they visited Salt Lake. So one of their businesses is the Hotel Utah. They also needed to have a newspaper. So one of their businesses is the Deseret News and a radio station, KSL. They also needed, the sugar beet industry, centuries ago. And then it ends up with a quote that says, our businesses are small and they certainly wouldn't fund the operation of the church for long, but this is what they are. So I go and read it yourself. Seriously.
The Hotel Utah doesn't even exist anymore.
I know.
That's
but they were
crazy.
sort of forced to make these businesses. These are the extent of these holdings. The article was from 1985.
So nothing about Ensign Peak or any of that.
No. And so then I thought,
man.
okay, I see what's here. Just this list of all these topics. A lot of them lead back to the gospel topics essays. A lot of them are very general, old quotes, old videos, old conference talks. So I started to look, what is not there? What would I want to see? If I were a faithful member and I went to, say, my house and I heard me talking, I would go home and say, what does she mean youth interviews? What's that? So I made a list. These are things just off the top of my head that I looked at today that are not there. Nothing about protecting children, nothing about the Boy Scouts, nothing about the SEC fine, nothing about youth interviews, charitable giving, no mention of Ensign Peak, nothing about clone companies, nothing about LDS Charities, the organization that does donate through wealthy LDS donors, nothing about church finance at all, except for that one that I just referenced, and nothing about church real estate. And that was just right off the top of my head. So I will say it's a great step to have this go-to guide, topics and questions, but they need to revamp the entire thing. They need to update it. They need to include things that people really would be looking for in the real world. And they need to use current resources. And I'm not sure why they don't. Maybe that's the bigger question. Any thoughts?
I feel like my cynicism has been completely vindicated.
What?
There was a comment in one of these pages that said something like expect change. Mm-hmm. And it occurs to me that the idea of expecting change is really just them going like, look, the church today is not what Joseph Smith restored. We've changed it all. It's all different. It's all different than what Brigham Young did. It's what Joseph Smith did, what John Taylor did. Like, that's not today's Mormonism. We altered all of it, but you should have expected that all along. Also, it occurs to me that high demand fundamentalist religions often change their vernacular. Like, they have a unique vernacular to begin with, and they're often changing it. So this topics and questions rather than the gospel topic essays, because number one, it makes it harder for people to find it when you change the names often. And second is if somebody's been out of the church for a little while, they're using the old language, and the Mormon can immediately know that this person isn't using the current language of the church. Hence, some level of distrust occurs in our mind. And so you'll see high demand fundamentalist religions change their vernacular all the time, their vocabulary all the time around terms for what things mean. Free agency to moral agency, for instance.
This kind of attitude is why you had your membership withdrawn, Bill.
There's another one.
Well, for example, even the section I looked up, the cross, because we all know we've seen this incredible interest in the cross now. It's not only on Google Maps. Younger Mormons are wearing Christian jewelry. I think there was a big picture on Easter of 3 crosses on a hill on the church website. Well, in topics and questions, it says, we do not espouse or follow the cross. with, the old school, what we all learned. We focus on the birth. So again, I just say this is a great idea, but we need to update to reflect what I think people already kind of sense. This is very outdated for some reason.
For some reason.
I would like to see Book of Mormon historicity and have it talk about anachronisms and all the Michael Coe problems that were mentioned. Do you know if there's an essay on Book of Mormon historicity yet?
I think it'll just refer you back to the Gospel Topics essay. Yeah, everything's very vague. My co-host mentioned to me, Landon, he said, I think this might be just a place that, like I mentioned, he had gone into his bishop with 3 hours of questions. Well, now the bishop, who doesn't know anything about those questions, says, have you looked at the topics and questions guide? It's a place to send somebody to, and also for parents or for anybody that's has a question or come to them. So that may be more what it's for, is just a place to kind of send somebody to bide some time.
Also, the church says, like, hey, past leaders have sinned and we've made mistakes. But I'll be damned if you try to ask them to name those mistakes or what those sins are. And it's harder, it's like pulling teeth to get a top church leader to admit what the mistakes or what the sins would be.
And can I make the passing observation that it is remarkable to have a church that is led by prophets in direct contact with God, whose foundational scripture is the Book of Mormon, and who has a link that says, if you're curious about the geography of the Book of Mormon, click here. And when you click there, the answer from them is, we got nothing.
Exactly.
We have no idea.
Yeah. I would encourage everyone to go look through it. It's very interesting.
I just included a link in the comments.
Oh, good.
Yeah. All right. Anything else, Rebecca, on that?
No, I think that's it. We did discover another one while we were looking at that. There's another one called History Topics and Questions, something like that. And it's very, very hidden. Like, you can only kind of arrive at it in a really roundabout way, but it does have a little more hard-hitting, revealing answers. So I think maybe the big answer is there are things on the church website, but they're not going to be accessible to the common person who's just trying to go through. You really have to go through, should I say, rabbit hole after rabbit hole to try to find some of these answers.
All right.
They are not made to be found.
No, I don't think so.
They're not written to be read.
That's good. That's good, RFM.